bit taller. 来，你不有屁。
So formal. Okay, we're so casual at Eton. So hi, I'm Chantal. I'm the Director of Culture at Eton. This is basically, as you know, like a hotel, a co-working space, but also like a cultural platform and a change-making kind of business in Hong Kong. Anyways, so today we're here because of the Human Rights Arts Prize. I don't know if you guys even know that. So we're here because of the Human Rights Arts Prize, and we just screened a film, which was extremely intense. Maybe about, well, the synopsis always says that this film is about the root of all evil, you know. Where can we trace the root of all evil? And then I invited, so the Human Rights Arts Prize is actually an annual prize, Hong Kong Human Rights Arts Prize, annual arts prize that's given, Hong Kong Human Rights Arts Prize is an open call prize that is awarded to one main winner, but also two runners-up every year, with artists that are working around the topic of human rights. And so if you will go around the hotel, you'll see different artworks all over this space. But we're also working, and the funds that is raised from that goes to the Justice Center, who provide legal support to those in need, especially migrant communities, including refugees and asylum seekers, and different forms of migrant communities. So we are also there to support them. Today, though, is a special programming that Eton, HK, and myself have organized in response to the Hong Kong Human Rights Arts Prize, which is an unusual kind of way to question what human rights actually means. On one hand, we are often comfortable saying, oh, you know, the human rights means that we're going to be activists, you know, we're going to do good for society. But I think we seldom actually question what is our own ethical sense of values and our moral standing, and really deep diving into that. So we thought it'd be maybe a little bit more effective to deep dive into what is our individual responsibility vis-a-vis tragedies, global tragedies, but also local social issues that we can take on ourselves. Are we actually tackling them? Do we actually care as individuals, or do we just sort of pretend like we care? And I think that this is the premise of this kind of conversation. And so I invited Innocent, a dear friend of mine, who I thought would be the best person to help tackle this question from an intellectual perspective, to help me deal with this. So I'm going to let him speak and take over and introduce everybody else. There's two microphones on each side, and this is the debate in motion.
All right, looks like a stand-up comedy microphone.
There's
I'm
also stand-up
just
comedy
tempted
later,
to tell
so
some
if you wanna
jokes
save
right
for
now.
drinks.
All right, I'm not going to tell any jokes, so don't expect anything. But yeah, thanks guys for coming, and thanks for these wonderful debaters. These are the stars of today. They're going to show what they have in a minute, and the chair of the debate today is going to be Evan Chan. Evan is, he's going to be here in a second. He's a captain of the debate team at CUHK. So the teams we have today, the teams we have today so as you can see, right, we've got CUHK, City University, University of Macau, and then Hong Kong University. So it's going to be fun. And then Ivan is going to come here and introduce to you how this debate is going to flow and how, so that you can also be able to follow if you have never really seen any professional debate before. So that's it for me now. I'm going to come back later. You guys are going to be the judges for this debate later on. So you're going to listen and decide which is going to be the winning team later on. So yeah, there's going to be some interesting prizes for the winners. So let's welcome Ivan, and then, yeah.
Okay, so hi, I'm Ivan. This might seem a bit different from your typical debate setting. So I'll just clarify a bit on what exactly and how exactly this debate is going to happen. As opposed to just 2 teams, we have 4 teams. We have 2 teams on the government or proposition side, and we have 2 teams on the opposition side. And the second team, what they're supposed to do is try to present newer arguments, but at the same time distinguish themselves from the opening or the other houses. The speeches are slightly longer. They're 7-minute speeches as opposed to 3 or 4 minutes. And in the speeches, people can interrupt speakers through things called points of information, where you basically raise questions, statements, or facts to throw the speaker off guard. So to briefly introduce the different speakers of today's debate. From opening government, for our Prime Minister, we have Usman Qureshi. Deputy Prime Minister, we have Merbadon Kangara. From opening opposition, we have Jingyi Lei and Kiki Liu. From closing government, we have KL Crystal Cheng and Bob Ngai. And from closing opposition, we have Bong Bong and Cindy Cat. So without further ado, I'll ask the first speaker from opening government to start today's debate. On the motion, this House believes that bystanders of social violence are morally culpable as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, inaction in the face of injustice makes an individual morally culpable. Now, in terms of the context of this entire debate, by the term bystanders, we are referring to everyday citizens who are indifferent to escalating persecution to events, for instance, the Holocaust, although witnessing them firsthand with the ability to do something, to bring some change. In terms of social violence, we are referring to escalating persecutions through the means of violence towards an individual or social group, albeit that some forms of social violence are normalized in the sense that there are differing values of religion and politics. We understand that murder is universally accepted to be unacceptable, especially on the grand scale as debates like this take place. Now, in terms of moral culpability, we argue that we must hold the individual responsible due to their ability to make the difference to the crime committed, yet not doing so. We believe that they should be held morally culpable if they are unable to act independently, or even if they fail to involve someone who can act to solve or mitigate a situation. So, my speech will be divided into 2 main parts, from the historical context and the contemporary context. Now, in terms of the Holocaust, it's relatively intuitive about what we know of it, right? Germans argued that they were bystanders, that they were not involved towards what their government did to the Jewish population, right? To the discriminated populations. Well, we understand that the Holocaust was not an overnight event. It was something that built up. There was escalating persecution towards the discriminated, right? There was a series of events that took place over a long period of time. Jews were slowly dehumanized. They were deprived of many legal rights. They were victims of random and organized pieces of crime. So what we saw is that social violence was in fact normalized within society before ideas of exterminations took place, right? So bystanders became normal. They accepted this ever-radicalizing program before the mass roundups and killings. They witnessed persecution of neighbors. They participated in normalizing discrimination against the Jews, and they did not help, for instance, the Jews to hide when they came for them, right? So what we believe is Hitler used this Hitler used these circumstances to unite against a common enemy after World War I, using Jews as scapegoats. So, for instance, what we're talking about in terms of bystanders is the train conductors that led the Jews to their deaths, the soldiers, the civil servants that put heavy tax on these discriminated, right? So, this is why we believe that the social narrative does count when it comes to the social persecution of the discriminated, right? The individuals, for instance, that feared for their own safety and thus did not participate in helping the Jews, for instance, they think that they did not care or they did not know. We argue that, however, because social violence was the norm, it was accepted, and thus people did not ask questions. Because of the fact that they accepted, they internalized this sort of discrimination against the particular social group. This is why the Holocaust took place, right? Social violence is not a one-off. It is an overnight situation, and because they were united behind a common enemy due to the rhetoric delivered by Hitler, they were taking part in discrimination against this particular social group, the government was given leeway to engage in acts of social violence against a particular social group, right? So in terms of a contemporary context, what we understand in terms of a liberal country, for example, is understanding the characterization. We're talking about an educated people. We're talking about people with access to internet, right? So the status quo is these individuals, we live in a social justice atmosphere. In terms of mainstream culture, we advocate for peace, harmony, and equality, the rise of social movements. We live in a globalized society, aware of whatever goes around our world. We cannot dismiss the possibility of not being exposed to different ideas, right? Because we have Facebook, we have Reddit, and so on and so forth. We are no longer stuck in an echo chamber when it comes to a liberal society. So at what points do people like us become morally culpable? We argue for one thing, that you must try. After assessing the situation, understanding that whether or not your action or inaction brings harm or brings benefits to the specific populations in question, what we argue is that at least the individual must try. You must try your best to bring change to the social violence that the social group is victimized for, right? So if you have the possibility, for instance, to bring influence, to raise charity, to protest against a social discrimination taking place in China or in the United States, so you must try to the best of your ability to bring changes whenever you can. For instance, even if it is as minimal as changing your Facebook profile picture for awareness purposes, we believe that people must engage in this type of behavior to disperse themselves of the moral capability, right? So what about from an international point of view in a liberal context? We believe that obviously moral culpability is the social norm. We live in an American hegemony. When something goes wrong in our world, when we see something going wrong in Syria, when we see something going wrong in the United States, we look to others for help. We look to the United States to come in to step in to help because they're referred to as the global police. We look into the United Nations to come and solve the problem, right? But we stand by and do nothing. So this is the type of narrative that we are fighting against, right? And we argue that not every type of intrusion has to be through the means of war. Not every type of intrusion has to be through the means of violence. Because according to the Golden Arches theory, for instance, what we can do instead of fighting fire with fire is, for instance, what we see happening to the Uyghur people in China, over 1 million of them being within concentration camps. We start boycotting Chinese products on a larger scale. So we understand that war is not in anyone's favor. However, economic growth in contemporary society seems to be a priority of a lot of different nations. So this is the way we will force change through economic means, through economic sanctions. We don't need to put ourselves in danger, and it applies to an individual as well, right? So what if you do, if for instance, put yourself in danger, you think that, okay, if you protect this particular Jewish individual from persecution, then you will be sent to prison or you will be hung yourself, right? We believe this is still important because of the symbolism of giving your own life, right? Because if you still put yourself into a position of weakness, at the minimum, you spark discourse, such as what we see that as Malala has done. And why is this effective? Because of the nature of sensitization that my partner will expand on, right? So, in terms of moral culpability, what we think is that it's more effective than legal accountability because it regulates human behavior where rule of law does not apply anymore. For instance, in the Holocaust, we are unable to charge every German for war crimes they may have committed, for allowing genocide to take place, right? Or not helping Jews wherever they could. But rather, in terms of moral culpability, we recognize that each individual's burden of peace and morals, and in terms of the social contract of being bound by your same society, living together in a globalized country, you must take care of one another so as when the law fails to work, when as the law fails to take place, when it fails to be exercised, you can rely on yourself for bringing change, right? So what our house brings to you so far is the role of bystanders in historical context and the contribution of social narrative towards social violence that takes place due to lack of individual action, the rise of social media, and how moral culpability works in different settings such as liberal context, and how we can truly bring social change. Thank you very much.
Okay, so as the leader of opposition, we believe that today the essence of the debate is going to focus on two levels. First, the individual level, whether it is fair and effective to encourage the bystanders to engage in stopping the violence. And also, for the society as a whole, how to play a pragmatic and expeditial role to stop the crime and instead of simply having somebody to blame. And today, we're gonna render to you a justification why it is unfair to judge the bystanders as morally culpable considering the disastrous social impact. And also give you an alternative that is to improve the law enforcement agencies to professionally and effectively solve the social violence over time. And first, let me make some responses to the government side. They talk about the historical context, like how the Jewish people are being discriminated against, the Holocaust are being happened under accumulated situation of those bystanders have no moral engagement to help those Jewish people. And also they say like we should prioritize saving the stranger for all the bystanders to try their best to offer any help. Yes.
Seeing as it is that each individual German could have assisted a Jew by welcoming them into their homes when they were being persecuted, how can you say that the German people had no accountability or effectiveness at the individual level?
Yeah, that's what I want to say right now. Then first, let me engage with you, right? So for the personal issues of those for those German people, we should consider that whether they are capable enough and also whether they have the time available. And when they're considering the situation is going to be dangerous, is it going to cost my life? How is it going to affect the people who cares about me for those German people, right? Why I need to offer the help? Because I'm going to affect the feelings, I'm going to affect the feeling about those who care about me. Even if I know that Jewish people are being discriminated against from my government, they are doing so wrong, we still have to consider those questions, right? Because we have a common ground. That is you, that is me, that we are all simply vulnerable human individuals. Like, we always need to respond with such a social violence when we are considering we're so vulnerable.
Sir,
we
before
need
you
a great
continue.
level of hesitation and consideration, and that's why we need to always prioritize we also have the individual liberty to prioritize our personal interests because we have so many things to consider in our lifetime. Because due to the human psychological process, when the social violence happens in front of our eyes, we always have so much time to digest those social issues. And we need so much time to respond to that, let alone standing up to go against it, to effectively and efficiently solve those issues, right? Because involving different stakeholders analysis, we can see that it's not just personal issues. Also, for the violent perpetrators, we can see that when the bystander, even they want to help even if the bystanders, they do try to help, we can see that bystanders, most of the time they're weaponized bystanders, and sometimes they're intoxicated, and they're being so intoxicated. And when the social environment actually pushing those bystanders to offer any help, but the civilians, they are not armed. If they are facing, like, I'm helping the Jewish people, but actually when I go back to my community, the people will judge me and give me so much social norms to restrict me, and how can I respond to that, right? And also for the bystander, if they are being killed, like those social violence happening on the street, like the civilian casualties, and they can cause more civilian casualties because the perpetrator can hold those exterminating weapons like the guns, like the knives, and it can create a larger scale of the social violence. That's not what we want to see to happen, right? And also for those, even those perpetrators, they are conscious enough on the street, and they can also use it as a tactic to hold those bystanders as hostage, makes them easier to get away from the police officers, and actually lays more burden on the law enforcement agency. That is whether to prioritize saving the bystanders or to catch the perpetrator first. Yes.
You based on your whole case saying that the Germans will be in danger. Explain to me why is it morally correct that the life of one German is more valuable than the life of a Jew?
Oh, actually, for most of the Germans, if they're also facing such a social norm in such a society with so much pressure, it's actually for them so hard to digest it. Because actually on our side of the house, we believe that the major issue is to solve the crime, to solve the problem, not simply having vulnerable individual engagement, because it actually cannot solve anything, right? And actually, it is ridiculous to blame them at the first place when the bystanders are finally becoming troublemakers. They are obstructing the law enforcement process. They are obstructing those law enforcement officers to do their professional jobs. And that's why we come to our second part, that is how to introduce our model of focusing on the improvement of the law enforcement agencies to be the most accountable approach to solve the problem. because they are being supervised both domestically and internationally. So what is that? How can we achieve that? We can train skilled professionals in law enforcement agencies like the police officers, like the military forces, in the government agencies, and we can also use more screening tools on the street in those dangerous places like the broader camera surveillance coverage on the street. And that's how we can respond immediately and efficiently to track them. Unlike the individuals, it takes them so much time to even digest such a social violence. So how can they respond effectively to solve the violence, to go against it? They cannot even put them in a dangerous situation and to make the situation much worse. Because we always need to recognize we are living in a universe at peril. When there are more bystanders engagement, it's more likely to increase the complexity of the society. It's going to be easy to lose control. And the most important, we need to recognize the perpetrators, the ones who causing the great social harm, like the state machines and the Nazi Germany in the communist regime before, and also it's not the bystanders, therefore they don't even have the ability to stop it, right? And also, even in our worst case scenario, our law enforcement agency, they are abusing the power, using the police brutality, and the whole country is corrupted, they're suppressive, and the human genocide, in Nazi Germany, in the communist regime. But nowadays, like the government says, we're living in an age of information and globalization. When the state powers are being checked on the international stage, it's less likely. Like the people who are being discriminated against, the minority groups, they are more aware after the two world wars. They need to protest, they seek help on the international stage, they send petitions to the UN, to EU, and the global intervention won't let those things to happen that easily because they need to hold accountable, simply not because they should be accountable. They need to face the legal responsibility in the country. They need to meet the social obligation internationally and domestically, and that's why they need to commit to the society, to the country, to a longer time frame instead of the individual helpers. Even they solve the crime once, they cannot guarantee that they're going to do it forever, right? So here comes our conclusion. Today, we provide you that what is unfair. We give you a more detailed scenarios considering the impact of both the social level and the individual level, and how our model, like enforcing the law enforcement agencies, is under the rule of law with more accountability and committed to a longer time frame in the society. Very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Funny speech from opening opposition. He came up and told us what exactly the bystander effect is. The bystander effect is us needing time to digest and then needing forever to respond. This is what it is. Explain to us why you have no moral culpability for not acting. This is what the debate is, and this is not what you have debated, sir. Now, what we need to discuss is, for example, a couple of rebuttals on the point of opposition. First off, they stated that the bystander is obstructing law enforcement. Now, we question if they are aware of the motion. The motion which states that each individual bystander is morally culpable in acts of social violence. In acts of social violence, the police are in on it. In Nazi Germany, the example which opening government prime minister gave, the police were in on it. They were assisting to bring the Jews to the concentration camps. Looking at the Hutus and the Tutsis, there was a large backing from the law enforcement. So this whole idea that the mere fact that there is a law enforcement means that they must enforce the law, especially in cases where there is social violence, it is completely redundant, especially since we know which context social violence takes place in. Second place of analysis within this idea is that we can somehow enforce education on the law enforcement, but we cannot enforce the sort of education on the average person within the audience in order to make them act because they are morally culpable. Now, if we can train our law enforcement to act, why can we not train the individual who is in a better situation, as I will go on to explain, individual who can act in an even better and more effective way? I'll take closing.
In your definition, in your opening speaker, they said that they characterized the train conductors for Nazi Germany to be bystanders. In my understanding, the train conductors are actively and willingly delivering those Jews to the concentration camps. That doesn't seem to be to a
Sit down, sir.
bystander.
There are different ways of being a bystander. For example, if I am the one who is like switching the gas on, I might be like the person who's directly acting. If I'm the person who's like supporting or like giving you the gas which you're going to use, like the industrialist, I might be a bystander. I'm only wanting to make economic profit. As I'm going to explain, there are different levels of being a bystander, and each of them is morally culpable. We're not saying you're culpable like the person who's like stabbing the Jew with the knife in their hand. We're saying that you are also morally culpable, which is something that opening needs to clarify because your PM did not do so. I won't take that point. Now, as we're moving forward, I would say that there's already a legal basis for this, and why it is important that we're discussing the morality of it rather than just the legality. We already know that in areas like France, there's a legal basis, because if you see someone being stabbed and you don't call 911, because you could have called someone who could have acted, you have the moral basis to do so. And if you don't, you get fined. Now, why is it important that we're discussing not just legality, but morality here? It's simple, because in cases of social violence, the legal norms, the rule of law does not apply. When 11,000 Tutsis were killed by the Hutus, there was no rule of law, which is why it's important we focus on morality, because it becomes more ingrained. And it is only moral laws which regulates the standard of an individual's behavior within such situations. Now, I'll go on to explain why, for example, this is important. Because in our day-to-day situations, we are reinforcing certain social narratives. For example, within Nazi Germany, they were reinforcing anti-Semitism. Within the slave days, they were reinforcing anti-black attitudes. Now, because you're reinforcing this attitude, which will go on to be manipulated by a political party or by Hitler, in order to perpetrate this social violence, you are morally culpable. Stop dead in your tracks. Ask yourself what you're reinforcing, because it will lead to harm of an individual. You are morally culpable if you do not do that. Now we're moving forward into the reasons why you're morally culpable. Simple, social contract. You put yourself in a society, in a community, and you are bound to act for the betterment of the individuals within that community. You're bound to act for the betterment of all persons. And you might say, no, I hate gays, I hate Jews. But at the point at which you cross the line to social violence, not just mere hatred of an individual, but then to say that, okay, I want to have all the gays in society rounded up and hung. At that point, you have crossed the moral line, at which point you are morally culpable in a way that goes close to the main perpetrator themselves. Now we're going into why the bystander themselves is morally culpable. They're not morally culpable based on the consequences of their action, because this is not a consequential argument, it's deontological. You're morally culpable because you should act. Now, there are different ways in which you should act and different reasons why. You're morally culpable because your inaction, on the first point, your inaction, it furthers the regime that harms the individual. For example, if you're American and you are not doing anything to stop the Syrian civil war, because you're not doing anything and you're propping up the same regime that is harmful to the Syrian people, your inaction makes you morally culpable. A second way in which you are, warm your seat, sir. A second way in which you are morally culpable is because had you shown your contempt, you would have dispensed of your responsibility. You can show your contempt expressly, like Malala did, and she got shot in the head, but she expressly showed her consent. Or, as the PM stated, economically, if you boycott South Africa's products because they're supporting an apartheid regime, you are showing your contempt and you're dispensing with your moral responsibility to cause a positive movement in the global utilitarian perspective under which we lie. Now, another way, no sir, another way in which we can have like your moral culpability to be like dispensed is by, for example, joining a group. It might lead to no effect. If you join a Me Too movement, an anti-hijab movement in Iran, and it causes no effect, because this is non-consequential, this does not matter. But if you find that you yourself as an individual are taking on your burden and dispensing of it by joining that group, even if it does not have a positive effect, for example, if the Me Too movement actually like backlashes and the government has like more stringent measures on women, we still say that you have dispensed of your moral burden because you acted, ladies and gentlemen. Now, what we are going to move on to is why necessarily the desensitization is important, rounding off our speech, and why your support of the narrative is so negative. Now, because you've allowed yourself to be asleep in society, you've been desensitized, which is why you need to be awakened by more sensationalized things. Which is why you will ignore 300 boys being kidnapped in Nigeria, but then you will pay attention when 250 girls are kidnapped, because you need a victim to be victimized enough, which means that you allow for a large sector of people who are harmed, who are victims of social violence. But then because you have been so negatively fed in society, you will ignore their harms, which is why you are morally culpable for the harms of many individuals who you do not pay attention to as a result of your desensitization. And on the last point of supporting a social narrative which is negative, basically don't support negative social narratives because these create a microaggression culture which will then be manipulated into the macroaggression which will be this very social violence which we're discussing today. So what have we brought to you today? We've brought to you the importance of the individual's action because the individual can act for the betterment of the victim. And secondly, we have told you why exactly it is important that this individual who is morally culpable views themselves as such because they can act for the betterment of the victim. Very proud to propose.
You ready to pass?
Ladies and gentlemen, we heard a very funny speech from the DPM. They try to gobble the concept between perpetrators and actors. We tell you that there's a clear difference between perpetrators and actors. So what is perpetrators? They are the people who have premeditated their actions and have voluntarily want to cause harm to others. Unlike bystanders, right? Every one of us can be bystanders at any time and anywhere. We do not premeditate or we do not want to cause harm to others, and most often, well, we do not manage to get off on time, and tada, we become bystanders, right? So we think it's very funny to say that someone is equally guilty for just happening to witness something as someone who has potentially plan a mistake and act on it, right? We tell you this is unfair, just put a standard on bystanders to make it the same as the perpetrators, right? So, rebuttal time. First of all, they told us that, okay, we have because the bystander accept it, so it's actually their fault. They are actually guilty for not stopping the violence, right? We tell you this is not the case, right? Because they failed to prove to us that why necessarily when bystanders decide to intervene, then this kind of social violence will automatically vanish, right? So they give the examples of Holocaust. So we tell you that it's impossible for actually German normal mundane to actually save this kind of Jewish, right? Because the fact that when they try to welcome this kind of Jewish people into their home, right, they would just be killed by this kind of fanatic ideology-driven Nazi army, right? And also this kind of ordinary mundane are actually unable to combat with this kind of huge military junta. And notice the fact that we are not actually saying which kind of life is more important and which kind of life we should value more. We are actually saying it's actually the right for the German people to decide to defend himself. It's actually the right for himself to be scared, and it's actually his right to decide not to help because he wants to live, right? So we tell this it's unfair for you to actually call him morally culpable just because he wants to protect himself over a stranger, right?
Before you continue.
Yes.
So you talk about the fact that, it's not the fault of the German people at all, and they should actually defend themselves. Okay, even if we accept that argument, but we understand that the root cause of the Holocaust was because of the normalization of discrimination against the Jews, for which the bystanders are responsible. So how can you still not call them morally culpable for that?
They of course are not morally culpable because notice the fact that this kind of normalization happens because they actually want to protect themselves, right? This kind of fanatic ideology Nazis do not come from this kind of German people, but it's actually Hitler and this fanatic army, right? We tell you fundamentally it's the right for the German people to protect themselves instead of actually risking their own family just to save a stranger Jewish, right? We tell you it's your right, given the fact that your right to defend yourself is given by the law and protected by law. So unless you are able to prove to us that why is it necessary for you to give up everything just to save a stranger, right? As second rebuttal, they tell us that we have to look out from others in order to stop social violence. We tell you this is not the case, right? Ladies and gentlemen, the fundamental reason for this kind of social violence to end is not because of intervention of bystanders. It's actually because the victim realizing that there's actually being long-term suppressed and they want to stand up, right? Why the African being discriminated has drastically gone down. It's not because the white people decide to intervene and tell them that, hey, we should not discriminate black people, right? It's the black people, they stand up together, cooperate together to fight against the people who actually oppress them, right? We tell you the responsibility lies more onto the victims themselves who want to stand up and fight for themselves, not necessarily just the bystanders' fault, right? And also, they are unable to tell us that why necessarily we have to try our best to save stop social violence if we are actually unable to do so, right? So if you see like an armed rapist is trying to rape a girl, it's actually higher possibility for you to stop the rape from happening. But if you see like robbery or just murder cases happening in front of you, given the fact that armed, how are you able to stop this kind of social violence if you're unarmed, right? So it's actually your right to defend yourself, and actually your right to feel scared and to hold back yourself from protecting yourself, right? So what we tell you, right? We tell you that it's actually very unfair and very irresponsible to force bystanders to intervene in the process of social violence, right? Because there are actually many factors affecting the decision of the bystanders whether or not they want to intervene, right? First of all, we tell you that they fear the prisoner. They fear the prisoner risk is too high, and they just simply don't have the strength to help it, right? And second of all, we tell you that a lot of case happens under ambiguity. Often this kind of social violence happens under chaotic or ambiguous cases. You do not really know when to intervene. There's naturally no clear boundary for you to know that, oh, you should intervene right now or you shouldn't intervene right now, right? So you don't really know whether it's just a quarrel between lovers or when is it just domestic violence, right? You might misinterpreted the case wrongly, right? So there's actually a famous case, right, at the Kitty Ginowe stake by a man in 1964. So 38 witnesses, they actually thought that it's actually a lover quarrel and decided not to intervene, considering the fact that it's actually a murder case, right? So you can't say that this kind of 38 witnesses are morally culpable. You can say they are insensitive, you can say they're stupid for misinterpreting the cases, but definitely you can't blame them for being guilty because they do not know whether it's just a quarrels between lovers or it's just a case of it's a murder case, right? And also we tell you that it's actually your right to prioritize other things, right? A single man is more likely to offer help than a man with his beloved family of children, right? Not because he's selfish, right? It's because like he prioritizes other things like his wife, his children, or his job more than just simply a stranger, right? So we tell you actually that their right to value other things and prioritize other things wins further than the right to defend others, right? So what is our alternative, right? So we tell you instead of like put the loopholes of the surveillance system onto the bystanders, we're actually gonna enforce the law, right? Because we know that this kind of social violence normally happen in isolated areas, so we're gonna increase surveillance system, right? And also for combating bullies or to detecting potential victims or perpetrators, we're gonna add screening program or screening tools, not just in the schools or workplace, right? So what makes us different from that is we actually solve the fundamental reason for social violence, which is to detect the perpetrators instead of just solely put all the blame to the bystanders, right? So in the end of the day, I want you guys to ask yourself, right? We all have heard what goes around, which means that good will be rewarded with good, while evil will be rewarded with evil. But under the case, it's just totally opposite. You will be screwed if you don't want to help. You will be blamed if you are actually just scared. And you're actually forced to become heroes, and you actually have to be forced to ignore the fact you are actually scared and you prioritize other things simply just a stranger, right? So ladies and gentlemen, superheroes are actually superficial and have unlimited strength to combat evil, but we are not superheroes. Everyone of you is just ordinary mundane. It's actually hypocritical to call everyone else just acts as superhero because obviously we are not superheroes, and it's actually our right to protect ourselves, right? Thank you.
Is it okay if I don't use the mic, actually? Because I have a really loud voice. Is that okay with the audience? Because I feel like if I breathe into it, you guys might have, like, issues in your ears. Anyways.
I think they're trying to record, though, so I feel like for the recording, we'd rather have you breathing into our ears. I'd love to have you breathing into my ears.
ASMR. Let's go. So ladies and gentlemen, first I would like to start my case with a few rebuttals. So just now the leader of opposition comes up and tell you that, oh, individuals were really powerless. But have you ever thought about how bystanders are? We all are bystanders, according to what they say. And that means that the majority of us are bystanders. And imagine if all of us just chip in a little bit, a little coercive power into forcing our governments to actually care, making ourselves a little bit more informed, making us actually lobbying and then change the system that they're trying to prove today. Ladies and gentlemen, today the leader of the opposition come up and tell you that their goal is to actually have a better law. But first, we ask you how laws are made. Lawmakers are people, are representatives from the people, right? And then if we actually voice out our concerns and tell our representatives that there are social injustice happening, we do not want this to happen again, and ask them to actually change the laws, then we will achieve the goal of the opposition. And then when they talk about solving the crime, they don't really understand what are bystanders. Bystanders are citizens, and if we care, if we actually inform ourselves, if we actually feel guilty and morally culpable, and we will have the urge to actually save these kinds of victims that do not have a voice themselves, I believe that our side will actually achieve what you want. And then when you say that people don't have time to digest social issues, we ask you, just because we're weak doesn't mean that we shouldn't look at what is happening in this world. We tell you no. And today, why our closing will tell you we win today's debate is because we tell you principally wise, it is not fair even if you successfully or unsuccessfully change or create influence in today's society. First, morally culpable means that these kind of people we see are victims. We do not see them as equals. We see them as people that are inferior, and we believe that it is a disrespect to human lives. And then if we don't move, this inaction is action. It is supporting injustice as a whole. Do we want the world where people believe in justice, or we want the world where people live in their personal bubbles and think that they actually don't have power to change while we're actually living in a globalizing society? I've told you, bystanders are actually the majority. We're the people that can carry change. And then bystanders in history, look at Rwanda. Do you know what happened? There were troops that are stationed in this country, Belgium, French troops. They see people are dying at their doors, but they didn't do anything. They watch people die, and they didn't say anything. The international communities are blaming them because they know that there is the power to change. But then, I also present you with another case. Do a lot of people you know about the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar? 30 years ago, these kinds of Rohingyans, the minorities, lose their citizenships. No one stood up for them. 20 years ago, they lose their hometown. Their houses are getting smaller and smaller. No one stood up for them. And in these 5 years, the military actually went into the village and started killing people and pushing them into other countries' boundary. And then still, not a lot of us knows about it. But if we chip in our power and actually tell our government that, no, this cannot be happening. We do not want to support this government, and we do not want any cooperation with this government. We actually have the power. We have the power. And yet the side opposition seems to neglect that, after my point. And then why do I say that these kinds of people, when we stand together, successful or not, we still have a responsibility? It's because I don't know if you've heard of John Rawls' veil of ignorance. Is that when we all are living in a society, we don't know which position we're going to end up in. Logically speaking, we want to split the pie as equal as possible. But this is an ideal society, right? And then a lot of times, everyone sitting here, we're the ones who are getting the biggest slice of pie. And then when we see that people are getting a smaller size, we say that it's because they're unfortunate. And then we don't care about it. Is that right, ladies and gentlemen? Is it okay that we sit inside our houses, look at these kinds of news, and then just turn a blind eye and not do anything? And then think that we are fortunate, and that these people are unfortunate, therefore I have no moral, I am not morally culpable to help? We tell you no. And then this is passive injustice, because we're allowing these kinds of injustice to actually perpetrate, to allow these kinds of injustice to continually be seen as unfortunate incidents. And then if we don't stand up after this point, and then if we don't stand up for these kind of unfortunate people, watching them die, after all of them died off, like the Tutsis, and then the Hutus and the Tutsis, who are gonna speak for them? They're all dead. When the opposition come up and tell you that black people should stand up for themselves, we say no. Asian, white people, all together, we should stand and then repress these kinds of injustice that is imposed on these kind of people, because we're all one people, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, yes?
You mentioned a lot of examples. Suppose my mother has cancer. Am I to dedicate all my time to caring about these things I have very little action over, instead of my dying mother?
So one thing you can help is that lobbying is one way. There are different methods, as our opening has told you, that you can actually make a difference. You don't have to sacrifice everything you have, but every little thing you do accumulates, because we are the majority. When the majority work together, we actually create a change. I don't know Sociology 101, but individuals make a family and a family make a community. And when a community actually stand together, they become a party which actually has actual power. Ladies and gentlemen, they're trying to put individuals in such a pity state and saying that these bystanders are the victim. No, the victim are the people that are dying and we are watching them burn. And we don't do anything. That is what bystanders are. We do not put deliberate harm, but we allow deliberate harm to be continued and forced on them and say that they're unfortunate. We couldn't have done anything. But what if all of us just stand up, find a first person, and then we all come together and actually work for a cause? What will happen? The world will be a better place. And then that is what we're trying to achieve. We are actually using this principle and telling you how it will reach to a practical outcome. And then when we talk about the Rwanda or these kinds of genocide, we see that why are people not actually doing anything? First, because of economy, right? They don't want to spend military spending on the people that are not their people. But they also ignored that these people might one day end up be them. And then they also say that we don't care because we're not informed. We don't have time. Ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't take a lot for you to scroll your Facebook and see what is going on in this world. And then when we prioritize our own interests over other people's lives, when we know that there's a little thing I can do, there's a bit of money I can donate to the charity and I don't do anything because I say that they're unfortunate and whatever I do won't count, there's a million of you that could donate $1 and save like a lot of people's lives. And yet we're just here drinking Starbucks and pretend that nothing is happening. Ladies and gentlemen, your organic coffee won't end social injustice, but your actual care will do. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It seems to me that the opening house has confused bystanders with essentially all those individuals who are working at Auschwitz. In my conception, a bystander essentially in Nazi Germany would be a random Fräulein Hofstadter running a Bratwurst sausage shop in Berlin. And nobody who didn't involve herself in the machinery, the state machinery that they were talking about, those individuals that they were talking about, I would call them collaborationists. I don't think that is in the scope of the debate. By the time of the lower house came out, bystanders seem to have become a word synonymous with being human beings. I think they've missed the characterization and the essence of this debate. I think bystanders, it's very silly for us to analyze and generate arguments from the analysis of words. If you had read Nietzsche, Nietzsche has told us that only a concept that has no history can be definable. Therefore, no amount of a definition can properly capture the essence of bystander. You must feel what bystanders are, what the dynamic, no thank you, what the dynamics, the range of dynamics that a bystander perpetrates a situation amounts for. Only then can you understand why this notion must fall. I'll give you several arguments. No thank you, sir. No thank you, madam. My first argument is that I think the entire proposition has been giving us rather isolated examples in which they might be most strategized, most at an advantage to advance their arguments. I think I will be putting forward an attempt of a general moral theory. I think it's useful for us to take a look at this this analogy. Aristotle once said that man is neither beast nor gods in his conception. What does that mean? It means that we're not beasts. When we're not beasts, it means that we're not only prone to our material and physical desires. We're not only dictated, and we ought not be dictated by only our desires for lust, for food, and so on. But we're not gods either. In our difference from animals, we're capable of reason, and we're capable of moral reason. We're capable of acting morally, and we compel ourselves to act morally. But we're not gods. We're not infinite in our capability to act upon our moral impulses. We're not capable of flying over and stop the Syrian war. We're not capable of doing everything. And because of those reasons, there is a conflict between our own interest and between our moral interest.
Before you continue.
No, thank you. Oftentimes, those moral reasons come in the form of general principles. They tell us in that moral forest with many paths before us, which path to take. But oftentimes, those reasons come in the form of general principles, and the general principles that proposition has talked about. Those principles are oftentimes ignorant and agnostic of the general geography of that forest, whether that particular path has been blocked by a tree, whether that path has been guarded by some fearsome beast, whether some other paths, aside from the ones that is recommended by more reasons, actually lead to even more desirable paths that can lead to a better future. Those general principles, in general, do not inform ourselves of those particular geographies. What does that mean? Morality might command us to do something that is difficult or one that cannot do. Now, if you know that, then you must say that that runs against our intuition. That runs against that. No, thank you. No, that runs against our intuition because our practical moral reason commands us to say, protest against this, and says, if a moral law tells us that we ought to do something, then it means we can do something. If we cannot do something, then it is crazy. It is unreasonable to say that we ought to do it.
Please engage, sir.
No, thank you. Our evaluation of general morality should be based on a practical morality, not theoretical principles that they were talking about. A general principle that doesn't pay any attention to particular circumstances that were forced into. Now, why does this relate to?
Sir.
No, thank you. Why does this relate to bystanders? Because bystanders are precisely those that are placed in this moral forest in which the paths before them are very difficult to choose. Now, moral culpability should be assigned according to practical morality, and not the theoretical and transcendental fluffy principles that they were talking about. Why might bystanders fail or legitimately refuse to do the intuitively moral thing? I think there are many principles, many reasons why that may be so, but recognize the fact that a bystander-perpetrator dynamic is not a clear-cut thing. Is a easy label for a wide variety and wide range of dynamics. For example, it might be because that the right thing to do is not clear, or the right thing to do is not. You don't know what is the right thing to do. For example, suppose you're in the Cultural Revolution, and you see a criticism section in which people are doing what they do in the Cultural Revolution. You're a bystander. You're literally standing there in a circle, outside of the circle. What are you to do? What exactly can you do? Do you run outside and stand before he or she who is being violently criticized? Will that help? I don't know. I don't think that would help. That would only put yourself into trouble. Or, for example, it might not be clear that your immediate action would actually result in a greater good. For example, imagine yourself to be a black man in the deep south in the 60s, and you see an angry white mob. No, thank you. To lynch a particular black man. I think from their characterization, they would recommend us for that black man to immediately jump before that crowd and cry and stop the lynching. I don't think that would work. I think that man would be lynched as well. I think what would be better is that for that black man to recognize that who is being lynched is already practically a dead man walking, and he should go home and recognize and document his horrors so that they be left for posterity, so that they can accumulate for better legislation change. For a third example, we might not be able to fully appreciate the jeopardy of those in a forest. Exactly what they're doing. They're not being placed in jeopardy. Those who are placed in jeopardy, they face the full horror of that particular situation. Yet they casually assign moral culpability to those who actually have to make difficult decisions. I think that's rather presumptuous of them. But most importantly, if we take a look at the general gist of things, and let's be intellectually honest. Suppose in the best case scenario for their side, where a bystander is placed into a situation where they can easily, reasonably help individuals, where the act of social violence is not some kind of means to garner and to achieve and pursue better justice, where the victim does not bloody deserve it. Do we think that the bystander should come in and what? It would be intellectually dishonest if I say no. I think that particular bystander should go in and help. But recognize that those categories, those situations do not form the majority and do not even theoretically form the majority of those particular cases. If that is the case, if you vote for that proposition because of this particular exception, then go for it. I don't think it's intellectually dishonest, however. And because of all those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you and plead for the opposition. Thank you very much.
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, before I tell you why we should win the case, let me sum up what Bonbons had told you. Closing opposition. Bonbon's whole speech was based on, one, because you cannot do it, therefore you should not do it, therefore you do not have the moral capability of doing it. Secondly, Bonbon's case was a more rhetorically packaged case of what opening has. Basically what he was saying was a lot of rhetoric and asking for 2 minutes what is actually a bystander. Actually, it's very simple. Our whole bench actually agrees that bystanders are not people who actually stab people, not people who actually supply gas to the people in Holocaust. Those people who actually live in current household, if they see a person that's getting sent in a Holocaust and see him outside my house, and I can just say, hey, come in and I can keep you safe. Now, be very clear, because Bonbon is only saying that just because that you can't do it, just because you can't defeat the government, you should not do it. Be very clear, right? We're not asking you to take a gun, go to the place and kill those people and kill Hitler, right? This is not what we're proposing. We're proposing is if we see a person in danger, then we should go and help. Same theory, if we see Muslim being locked in concentration camps in China, we're not going to ask you to bring a gun to China to shoot Xi Jinping in the head and say, this is not okay because you're locking Muslim in concentration camp. We're asking you to share on Facebook so more people know. So this actually forces countries, Muslim-dominant country, that like Indonesia, like Malaysia, these countries that has been restrained by political and economical incentive to not speak up for the Muslim to actually have to speak up, right? We're not asking you to actually go shoot the people in China or to fight against the police who is locking people up in those Muslims up in those concentration camps. We're going to ask you to do what you should have to do as a person in your ability. Now, second thing, after defeating Bong Bong, we would like to say why we will win, right? Because the opening government has only told you that, many examples of why in these scenarios that actually we are morally responsible. In my POI, I've already asked why is one life more important to other. If you consider one thing, right? When you're actually being hold a gun against you and you're going to ask to shoot another person, note that it's legally not possible. Reasons are, because I'm saying this because the whole opening case was like, it's better than legal, more is better than legal. First off, this is not a feasibility debate. But secondly, I'm happy going to say that we are going to prove that better than they do. Okay, so even in legal sense, when a person actually hold a gun against you and you shoot other people, it's not possible because in the law, the rationale behind the law is because your life is not more important than the other people's life. In this case, when you're a bystander, in most of the case, right, that you know that if you don't actually act, these things are going to happen to those people, right? In their case, they're just going to say, just because you cannot 100% stop them, you do not have the moral capability to do so. So we're going to say that even if you do not have 100% sure of actually solving them, just because you know that you by not acting can 100% does actually cause the harm to the other person, then you are actually doing the same thing, right? You are actually the person that is shooting the people because you know that it's going to happen to them. Same logic applies when you see a person of POC, a person who's actually gay and actually being discriminated. If you do not speak against them, you do not speak up to them, note that it's not like what the opening opposition bring to you. Do you have to be a law enforcement to stop these social problems from actually happening? We do not have to be people with weapons, right? If you see a person being gay, and he's being discriminated because of his sexual orientation, because of the different sexual interests that he has to you, and you do not speak up. Firstly, you're actually reinforcing that it's practically okay or practically socially acceptable for these people to be discriminated. So therefore, by being a bystander, you're not only being a bystander, you're being a person. It's part of the crime because you are telling people that it's perfectly okay to actually discriminate people, right? Yes, I'll take your POI bomb.
No, thank you.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Considering that most social violence cases are ambiguous, you don't really know whether or not to intervene. So how can you justify the legitimacy of a help when your help is sometimes over boundary, causing it to be like a...
Explain ambiguity. I don't know how ambiguous when you see a black person denied of opportunity, when you see a person with different sexuality denied of opportunity, we don't see how is that ambiguous in the very first place. We don't see how Muslim being locked into camps, being re-educated that the religions is bad. We don't see how Jews being locked up in Holocaust is ambiguously wrong, unless you have very ambiguous morality. That said, our case, what has Crystal told you, right? Crystal told you the sole reason that you are more able to actually help those people is because of birth lottery. That reason alone give you the responsibility to help those people that actually have in need, and that those people who actually is being under being forced under these social misfortunes. We say that these misfortunes itself can be alleviated by those people help, and even if it cannot be alleviated, we do actually have a moral responsibility to help. So think of it this way, right? If you want to vote for the opposition, right? If you want to vote for the opposition, you have to tell yourself it's practically okay if you see a person being discriminated and you do not speak up. It's practically okay if you see a person that is going to die in two hours later and you know you can save him and you do not save him. Right? If you do not take away the chance of him being in danger, if you do not be the person who actually actively stop them, you actually, in this case, actually pushing them to those misfortune that he's going to take. So if you want to really vote for opposition, you have to stand for all those immoralities. For all those immoralities, if you want to vote for them, please vote for. Unless of that, please vote for closing opposition, closing government. Thank you.
It would be morally convenient if we live in the world as Proposition imagines it, where bystanders of social violence, A, have the knowledge, the awareness, the understanding of the unjust nature of the social violence that happens before their very own eyes, where they have the reasonable capacity to battle it and the power to change it, where their act of helping comes at no great expense of themselves, where victims doesn't deserve the social violence, where the act of social violence is not a means for any form of reasonable justice. It would be rather intellectually dishonest if we say that if all these above conditions that I've mentioned are met, and yet it is still okay to be a bystander. Unfortunately, our world does not operate like that. And as our unique contribution is that we are not divorced from reality. We tell you the case of practical morality. Recognize that a lot of times the bystanders do not have the same access as a moral framework and a moral high ground that we outsiders possess. When opening opposition came up and told you about morally ambiguous examples, and the other side failed to appreciate the context that they were talking about, and therefore deny that it is always not the case, we are the house that are able to tell you what are the instances that we are talking about. When my good friend Kevin went to the Philippines for exchange, and he spoke to his host family, a group of honest, faithful Catholics who are otherwise kind, and he was startled to hear that the rest of, like the most of other Filipinos, they are actually supportive of Duterte. Of course, to us outsiders, right? We see the extrajudicial killings as being unjust, right? Because we come from a system where there is rule of law, where there is due process. Unfortunately, not only does she does not have the same access as we do to these concepts, the only thing that she's able to know is that her country was ravaged and ruined by the prevalence of drug abuse, that human cause of drug laws have caused. These are the things that she knows, right? And therefore, she buys into a narrative that these drug laws are lesser human beings to begin with. Now, she is a bystander in the sense that she does give tacit support to Duterte by not voting him out, right? No, thank you. But the problem is that we think, can you really blame her for not having the same access as we do to the moral frameworks that we have access to? Can you really blame her for being morally culpable in those instances? I think that these are the instances of moral ambiguity that all tries to talk about, and yet the other side did not really appreciate. no thank you. Secondly, right, we also tell that a lot, like we also tell you that in a lot of instances, right, like the bystanders of social justice, social violence does not have the reasonable capacity, nor knowledge to solve the situation, right? The other side tries to talk about like state-sponsored violence, right? Our response is simple. While the other side wants you to believe that it is reasonable for us, us to expect individual human courage to challenge the remorseless machinery of state power, we tell you that individuals are simply a lot of times not in a position to do so. At the height of the Cultural Revolution, local governments and ordinary people either participated or at least became bystanders of the beatings, of tortures, of struggle meetings of the so-called class enemies of Communist China. However, they did not have their autonomy in the sense that they were afraid to stop it. They were afraid to condemn it because if they did so, they are putting their own lives at risk. They are putting their own family's lives at risk, right? And therefore, the result was simply that villagers simply witnessed the beating of their landlords, right? And we tell you that that is the essence of our case, right? Because we think that if you expect a person to should do something, then he or she should also have the capacity to act in those instances. And we tell you that when a person is so deeply embedded in an immoral system that this incentivizes him from actively calling out and also stopping instances of social violence. It is problematic and rather convenient for side proposition to simply attribute responsibility to individuals who at least had the conscience not to participate in those instances of social violence. We also tell you that the other side try to want you to believe that moral duty or belief comes from social contract or John Rawls' theory of veil of ignorance, that they have this moral duty to act, right? We think that it is simply not a correct answer to ask, not a correct question to ask, why is one life more important than the other, right? Sure, it is easy for you as an outsider, as an impartial person who has no stake, whose life is not put at risk by acting or not acting, right? To say that one life is equal to the other. However, we are debating from the perspective of the bystanders. Is it really reasonable for us to expect them have the moral duty to act, right? We think that for them to assume that individuals necessarily already have this moral duty is simply a propaganda speech, right? Because they never justify to us why that moral duty trumps the interest, the rights of the person to self-preserve, right? We think that in and of itself is a great failing of the other side, right? More importantly, right, when they fail to answer our questions as to why individuals have moral duty to that extent, right, they try to concede, they try to shift the scope of the debate by talking about how sometimes we live in liberal democracies where we can have means of recourse, for example, voting, protest, or lobbying, right, where we are global citizens who are reasonably informed and educated, right? And they say that it's not really that difficult for you to change your Facebook profile picture, right? Our response is simple, right? We're simply not sure why under their scenario they will necessarily live in a better world than opposition lives in, right? Because the marginal difference, as I see it, is only selectivism. So why do we think that closing opposition is important in this debate, right? Because we've carefully analyzed a wide range of phenomenon of instances of social violence. We understand the nuances and then we analyze them in a detailed and careful manner, right? We tell that in a substantial number of instances of social violence that you simply cannot assign more culpability to bystanders of social violence, right? Ultimately, we believe that to excuse bystanders of social violence is not to excuse social violence itself, right? Our unique contribution comes from analyzing why that system in and of itself does incentivize people to act in a way that they should not, according to a proposition, right? And therefore, because of all those reasons, very proud to oppose.
Yeah, that was intense and awesome. I enjoyed it. Thank you guys for this amazing debate. So now we're gonna have everyone is gonna just comment on the general flow of the debate and how he feels about it, and then I don't know, maybe about 2 to 3 minutes or something like that, and then after that we'll ask you guys to vote. All right? Okay. Okay, he needs two more minutes. All right. Maybe while he's adding up his numbers, whatever he's looking at. What about for now? Talk to the person you are sitting next to, so that we can make this faster, right? So that you can go home and eat your dinner. Talk to the person next to you and figure out what you got. Which one do you think is gonna win? Just focus on one. Which one do you think should be winning? Okay, the person next to you. So discuss and then so that you can be processing this one, so that everyone is not gonna affect your views maybe. All right. So you have 2.5 minutes.
Come on, you say 3 minutes.
Okay, 3 minutes. Okay, talk to 3 minutes.
Yeah, I see. It's very tough. Somehow, I think
deep enough.
Bystander, the person somehow more or less responsible like that. I mean, they should take whether it is by hand or maybe
Of what's happening before. How about the future now? Well, when they start debating, what they're debating about the future, what tomorrow will be.
Yeah, if you see the violence, I mean, in the streets, you see the violence, so you yourself, you take in danger.
And then the audience on board decide which team is one, and then the audience will yes, the audience will decide. So you're free to decide. And then we the certificate.
Yeah, morally, I mean, are you responsible morally to act?
Yeah. Just stand by. You're outside the window. Active.
Yeah, so what you should more yeah, I mean, you need to comment and to give that comment.
How many times they have this sort of
what they can do? Yeah. So like two different issues.
Yeah. How many times they hold this debate? How many times they hold this discussion? How many times? Once a month? Twice?
Muhammad, Buddha, falsehood. What is the golden rule? Treat the people as you
The projection of
well, what you just said now.
stay open. Well, I don't know. No, the people want to you do the rest.
But it's another question whether
over there. Okay.
now you are
just after like 3 minutes or something like I want to check the capacity.
Okay, 2 minutes. I come. Strong guy beating the weak guy. You are able that you can stop now. You cannot beat this guy. Now what this guy did, maybe he stole something. Maybe I mean, because